Today on the Compound Growth Podcast, we're joined by a very special guest, Dr. Malcolm Rosenson, a longtime friend and all-around amazing guy. Malcolm was born and raised in the vibrant city of New Orleans, where he also earned his medical degree from Louisiana State University School of Medicine. Eventually, him and his amazing wife Jenny made their way to Newcastle, New Hampshire, where Malcolm became the head of infectious disease and later chief quality and safety officer at Wentworth Douglas Hospital. In short, he spent his career making healthcare safer, smarter, and more effective for thousands of families in our community. But the story doesn't just stop at the hospital door.
Boy.
Malcolm and Jenny raised 4 kids and now enjoy life as proud grandparents to 5 grandkids, all of whom live locally here on the seacoast, which means plenty of family dinners, birthday parties, and maybe even the occasional babysitting. Outside of medicine, Malcolm is a man of many interests: fly fishing, travel, and yes, the occasional inappropriate meme. He's also been known to enjoy a good glass of brandy to wind down in the evenings. Malcolm brings a truly fascinating perspective when it comes to money, legacy, and the way professionals like him think about wealth, family, and working with trusted advisors. How was that?
Very nice.
Welcome,
A
Malcolm.
little inflated. A couple of little errors, but do you need to correct them?
No, we don't need to correct him. Just roll with
I
it.
wasn't chief of infectious, he was chief of medicine. But
Chief of medicine. Okay, so even better.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, if we're undercutting you, you should absolutely correct it.
So you're from Louisiana. I know New Orleans as kind of a party city, a lot of fun. Whenever we go down there, we have a great time. What was it actually like growing up there?
Well, when you grow up in New Orleans is very different, as you know, from the rest of the country. It has its own culture, it has its own food, its own music, its own festivals, its own joie de vivre, and has often been referred to as the northernmost city in the Caribbean. And I feel as having lived many places and traveled many places, it is the least American of American cities. But when you grow up there, you don't know it's abnormal. You don't know it's unusual because you think it's normal to be in that culture and that environment. It's only when you move away you realize how strange it was to grow up there. There are many examples I could give you. First of all, New Orleans obviously are comprised by a wide variety of ethnic groups, and it's long been a city in which the ethnic groups have lived with each other and influenced each other. If you're from New Orleans, you can ask anybody from New Orleans, what do you eat on Monday? And everybody, regardless of their ethnic background, of their socioeconomic background, will tell you the same thing. It's red beans and rice. So there are specific New Orleans cultural attributes that you learn growing up there that don't exist elsewhere. Sort of a shocking one we experienced when my wife and I moved to Boston for my medical residency. We were with another resident. We were having a beer at a bar in Brookline, and it was time to leave, and my wife hadn't finished her beer. So on the way out, she asked the bouncer for a Go Cup. Because in New Orleans, you can bring your drinks on the street as long as they're not in glass containers. Any street in the whole city. Well, needless to say, the bouncer didn't quite understand to what she was referring and said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "A cup to put my drink in so I can leave." And he said, "You can't do that." And Jenny turns to me and says, "What kind of hell did you bring me to?" And it's so different in so many ways. But growing up, like I said, I thought it was normal. It was only when I moved away that place is really unusual. So it felt normal to me, but it wasn't compared to the rest of the country.
You told me a story not too long ago about going to, I think it was a Little League game.
Yes. Yeah, so as most people know that have ever been there or read much about it, it has a strong party culture.
Yes.
And my wife and I went to a Little League game to see her niece and her nephew play baseball. And we noticed a concession stand was selling beer. So I asked my sister-in-law, they sell beer here? And she looked at me like, why wouldn't they sell beer here? They sell beer everywhere. And then I noticed that the umpire who stands behind the pitcher, because there's one umpire, between innings had a beer in his back pocket and was drinking from the beer.
At a Little League
His
game.
ball strike calls got more accurate the later the game went, though. I'll say that. So that's another example. One other one, there was a bar in my neighborhood growing up, and it had a takeout window that you could walk up to. It was not a drive-through at the time; those came later. And when you go to this window, they wouldn't check your age at all. Basically, it was sort of like going to an amusement park. And there was a yardstick next to the window that says you have to be this tall to order a drink. But it had nothing to do with your age. It all had to do with were you big enough to reach the drink and not drop the change. So, and this is sort of the background. Also, the city's had an extraordinarily lively and important gay community going back into the 50s. It was much more out of the closet than most of the rest of the country at that time. Strong contributors to the culture there. So there's no shock or surprise with anybody's identity. You see people walking around in all kind of strange costumes, all sorts of subgroups, and it's a sort of laissez-faire, laissez le bon temps roulé attitude. You're not hurting anybody. Do what you want. So it was definitely an interesting place to grow up.
One thing I loved about going to visit you guys down in New Orleans was the costume closet.
Oh yes,
Yes, they have a closet that's probably the size of this room, just full of costumes for all of the parties that happen every year. And Jenny is very talented at making costumes.
she's the costume couturier for the family, and I would remark that a costume closet is a part of most homes in New Orleans that I know of. In fact, when one is looking for real estate to buy a house, one inquires about the costume closet to make sure it's of sufficient size.
Legitimately?
Yeah, legitimately.
It sounds like my daughter should move
Yeah.
to New Orleans. I
Yeah.
feel like
and
she could fit there.
yeah, we have a costume. We have everybody that I know of has a costume closet.
Welcome to the Compound Growth Podcast with Colin and Wheeler, where we talk all things growth, from financial growth to career growth, personal development to societal progress. We explore how each layer builds on the next, compounding over time to shape who we become. Each week, we break down complex ideas and emerging trends into clear, actionable insights. Because growth isn't just about numbers, it's about understanding the world and our place in it. The information in this material is for general information only and is not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Investment advice offered through Integrated Partners, doing business as Ko-Fi Advisors LLC, a registered investment advisor. Integrated Partners does not provide legal, tax, mortgage advice or services. Please consult your legal tax advisor regarding your specific situation. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All investing involves risk, including loss of principal. No strategy assures success or protects against loss. The economic forecasts set forth in this material may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that the strategies promoted will be successful.
My father was first generation. His father had immigrated from what's now Belarus in about 1890. My mother's family had immigrated from Alsace-Lorraine back in the mid 1800s, about 1860 or so. And interestingly, they settled in a small town in central Louisiana. They didn't settle in New Orleans. I don't know the entire story of how they got there, but so my father's side, we're there. I'm second generation.
Yeah. When you were growing up in New Orleans, I mean, I know it's changed a lot as a city for the most part, but it's always been pretty forward, in terms of its party scene and everything like that. Like, how has the city changed over time? Was it a pretty vibrant city when you were young? Was it wealthy? Was it not wealthy?
Yeah, it was quite vibrant. New Orleans was very wealthy and was a dominant port up through the 1950s. Was quite dominant, but I think it was unfortunately cursed with a lot of the racism that the old South had, and that is a lot of the wealthier people in town were old Southerners whose families had been there for generations, and it was very difficult for them to relinquish their positions of prominence, which gradually happened over time.
Yeah.
And there wasn't there wa- we didn't have race riots. For one thing, the city's kind of integrated. It's all checkerboard. It's not like you have huge swaths
Mm-hmm.
of low socioeconomic folks and then specific enclaves for wealthier people. So these neighborhoods are very close to each other, as you
Yeah.
know. So there's a lot more interaction with people. It suffered significantly after it did well during the oil boom, and then suffered significantly after the oil boom. And has recovered somewhat since. As you know,
Mm.
Hurricane Katrina, which month marks, I think, the 20th anniversary,
Wow.
had a devastating impact
Oh,
on the
wow.
city
Yeah.
and
20 years.
economy.
Yeah.
But it has recovered in large extent, in many ways. A good 25% of the population left the city after the hurricane due to their losses, and a lot of them hadn't come back. But there was a huge influx of young people to help with rebuilding the city and after it. And that has sort of been the history of the city. It periodically suffers some disaster, be it a hurricane, a fire, a yellow fever epidemic in the 19th century. And generally, you get an influx of people interested in the city. And we got a lot of if you don't have a drain, I guess you have a brain reservoir develop. So there's been a lot of rebirth there. So I think at this point it's doing fairly well. It's still a relatively poor city, no doubt about that by national standards. But it seems to be recovering at this point from that.
So, what was it like for you seeing it go through these different phases of wealth before you moved out?
Well, my father was a professional person, and his livelihood didn't depend entirely. He was a corporate attorney, so his livelihood really didn't depend that much upon how average folks fared in the city. There was a lot of national business there. The large lodging companies building hotels and developing other tourist amenities, and he represented a number of those companies, and his work never really suffered from it. Um, I had friends who had more difficulty, and some of them had to move because of financial circumstances. So it was a mixed bag. I think it was sort of part of the tempo of the city to realize it's going to have these ebbs and flows that are perhaps a little bit um, broader than a lot of other places that have more stable economy. I think the port was very strong. It has weakened in the last couple of decades. The hospitality industry has recovered largely, and but as you know, the hospitality industry is not as vibrant in terms of salaries and
Right.
wages as
Yeah, it's very cyclical
yeah,
too.
It
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
So
Growing up, so your father was corporate attorney.
right.
What made you want to go the medicine route?
I think there are a couple of things. One is very early on, I just got interested in science as a kid. I always had some sort of
Yeah.
experiment I was cooking up and some scientific project I was interested in. So I had a little home lab, not very sophisticated, but enough to cause distress to my parents. And my friends and I were always doing things with sort of science related games and whatnot. Um, and also, I mean, I really also like being with people. I didn't want to just be stuck in a lab, so that was an obvious choice. But I think even more determinative than that was as a kid when I'd go to the doctor, I'd have to uh, uh, seek health care. I was just fascinated by what seemed to be this entire mystical world that very few people really knew anything about. And I remember thinking very early on when I was 8 or 9, I says, I want to know what's going on in that world.
Yeah.
I said, it's got enough science to entertain me, and I'll get to be with people enough. But there's something in that world of alchemy or whatever it is that I want to be an insider on.
So you knew early that this
I
is
knew
the route you
very
wanted to
early.
go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I knew very early.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's awesome. So you go to school, University of Louisiana School of Medicine, graduate, and where does kind of life take you as you go through your career journey?
Well, so one of the features of my career has been some geographic tension, I would call it. And that is not unlike a lot of New Orleans women. It was very difficult to extricate my wife from New Orleans. They get very attached for some reason.
The to-go cups.
To-go cups.
So very specific.
It's the family stuff, it's the culture stuff. I mean, many New Orleanians can't, because it's so different, they can't imagine living anywhere else. You tell them, oh, you're going to move to Charlotte, and they tell you, under no circumstances. I don't care if I own the bank, I'm not moving to Charlotte.
Right.
Yeah. So I had come to New England in college, and I really fell in love with New England. So I really wanted to come back to New England for my residency, and I wanted to live in New England. And so my wife agreed, since there were good training opportunities in Boston. She agreed to move to Boston, so we moved to Boston for my residency, and then I got offered a chief residency an extra year. So we made one of these marriage negotiations. Okay, she said, I will stay an extra year if you do your specialty fellowship training back in New Orleans. So we agreed to that. So I was there 4 years, and then back and New Orleans, I must say, New Orleans is probably one of the best places for a clinician to train in infectious diseases in the country, as you might imagine.
That's like a hub where everybody,
a huge port, and merchant marines from all over the world. And, within 3 months, I'd seen 40 cases of malaria and all sorts of things. And, it was just the clinical wealth of cases there was just astounding. And it was really, I think it would have been more challenge if I was interested in pure research. I think it would not have been as good a choice, but I never really wanted to do research full time. So,
Sure. Yeah.
So we were there for 2 years, after which I said, we kind of talked about it. And I said, well, she said, I told her I liked it in Boston. You like it here. Neither of us really is caring too much for what's going on in the other city. Why don't we try some geographic intermediate? So we moved, when I finished my infectious disease training, we moved to Raleigh, North Carolina.
Okay.
It looked, for all intents and purposes, to be a good choice. One, just what looked like it was going to happen in terms of its growth and development, which has come to pass. I really thought it was going to be an excellent place to be for the next 34 years, which I think in most instances, it has been. And it was some place where you got 4 seasons, but not too much extreme of climate. And it was close to everything on the East Coast. So we went there, and so we were living in a kind of in a near suburb of Raleigh. And I remember getting home one day after we'd been there about 15 months. And my wife looked at me and she said, get me out of Stepford.
I think Jenny should be here, actually.
She can speak for herself. So I said, all right. So I agreed we'd go back to New Orleans. So then I practiced in New Orleans for 6 years. And that was a time when New Orleans was really in a nadir economically and socially. It was late 80s, early 90s, and we were victimized by some crime and some other things. And so finally she agreed, okay, this isn't a great place to bring up these kids. So she agreed to move to New England as long as it wasn't Boston. She didn't want to be in Boston.
I can appreciate
and we had
that.
traveled about New England some when I trained in Boston. So that's how we got back here. I finally got my way, basically. So
going through medicine and medical school and all of that stuff. When did you and Jenny get married? Was that when you were in medicine?
My senior year of medical school, about 2 months before I finished medical school.
Got it. So going through that, kind of getting into the money side of the podcast here a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, what was kind of life like when, I assume finances were tight, you were moving around, life changing?
Yeah. Finances were really tight. So we got to Boston. We had because we had some money from our wedding. We had a bed and a sofa, pretty much. And we ate off an Igloo ice chest as our dining table for about 8 months till we could save up enough money to buy a little, butcher block table. Yeah, exactly. And part of it was we were frustrated because there was so much about Boston that we wanted to experience that we didn't have any
Yeah.
disposable income. We couldn't go to the symphony. We couldn't go to concerts of various stripes. We couldn't go to a whole variety of places. Most restaurants were out of reach. Plus, my schedule was so difficult anyway.
Sure.
But it was really pretty lean. I mean, we ate reasonably well. We didn't eat beans 6 times a year, but
Just on
but-
Mondays.
What's that?
Just on Mondays.
Just on Mondays.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just on Mondays. Yes, even in Boston, we ate beans on Mondays. Finding the ingredients was a challenge, but we ate beans on Monday. So it was kind of frustrating because there was all of this wealth of possible experiences around and no means to really get engaged with it. Would that have, if we had the means, would that have changed Jenny's attitude about Boston? Probably not, because it was just the daily struggles.
Right.
But I was frustrated because we just couldn't avail ourselves of what was available.
Yeah. So you're going through your career, getting situated as a doctor. You're finally getting to a point where you have some disposable income.
Yeah.
Did life kind of change, or what habits changed for you when that started to get more comfortable?
Well, and I showed you a meme before. There's a new father and a new mother standing over a newborn infant, and he says to the wife, "What does it eat?" And she says, "Disposable income." So we have 4 children, so that's where all of our disposable income went.
Yep, that's fair.
It's just that there wasn't a pool of disposable income because it was all being disposed of with the children. But we did early on, when we were just still in training and a year or two beyond. My parents did help us some.
Yeah.
We wanted the kids to go to this particular school, and they helped with that. So,
Yeah.
And then a little further along, we started to get a little disposable income. Part of it was I was in a 2-person practice, so I had very little time off.
Yeah.
But at least we could plan to do certain things.
Sure.
So,
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Growing up, did your parents talk a lot about money? Did they teach you about money management at all?
Yeah, my father was the main teacher about financial matters. My mother was not unwise, but I think she felt that was his duty. So,
Yeah.
And I think there are 3 of us. I think each of us had a little bit different education depending upon receptiveness and whatnot. So, yeah, he was there to teach me some things that I needed to know. And thankfully, he was teaching me all along as I went through medical school, then training, then, young adulthood. He was there to help kind of me make decisions.
Guide you through it.
Yeah.
So eventually you probably found yourself a financial advisor.
So I practiced in New Orleans from 89 to 95 during one of those return moves. And the guy that I joined there had a financial advisor that he'd worked with for a number of years, and introduced me to him.
Got it.
And it was interesting because I was ahead of the curve because he was in Philadelphia, so we had pretty much a virtual relationship except once a year, back before everybody else did. So
Right.
everybody else has been since 2000, and we had it going on in 1990. Yeah.
You were the pioneer of the
We were
virtual
pioneers.
financial advisory
Yeah,
world.
and it's mainly because of my partner, who was a very nice and trustworthy fellow, recommended him, and
Yeah.
I didn't have anybody. And the people in New Orleans, my father used. He was really his own financial advisor. He was quite knowledgeable, and he just used them as brokers and
Yeah.
agents like that, not really for their planning skills or anything. In fact, they told me they learned from him.
Your father was the teacher.
Yeah, and
Sounds like a good one
as
overall.
As
Yeah.
you know, some other my family members still had a relationship with the New Orleans ones up
Yeah.
until recently.
Yeah.
So what was it? What was the relationship with an advisor like at that point in your life? What type of work did you do or conversations did you have?
So at first, I think it was sort of just getting to know me and sort of what he knew what my intermediate term goals were, because we had 4 kids we had to get through college, and
Yeah.
hopefully through college and or beyond, and that was the main focus of investing at that time, plus whatever little we could do for ourselves. Um, and then as that progressed, and we had a little bit more investable income, we'd met and he did some planning sessions, and we'd go over specifically the goals, and he would make an assessment of my uh, risk aversity. Um, he did sort of a traditional financial planning job at that time. And I was very happy with him. He was attentive. He would call periodically. He stayed in touch, and I'd see him once a year. Either he would come to New Orleans when I was there, or I would go to him in Philadelphia. Um, Got to be a friend of his. He was part of a community there where I knew some other people. So
Mm.
I think it was appropriate for the phases that we were going through.
We have a lot of clients who are in the medical field and they come out of school with quite a lot of debt.
Yeah.
What was your experience with that?
Yeah, I was very fortunate. In fact, that was kind of a deciding factor where I went to medical school. So I was going to go either to Tulane or Louisiana State LSU, and they're literally on the same street at that time, on the same street, and the big city hospital is what separated one from the other.
Hmm.
And the difference in the tuition and the difference of indebtedness uh, really sort of helped me make that decision. Again, had I been research oriented, I might have tried to go to Tulane because there was more rigorous research in certain areas. But the clinical part of this was equally strong, if not stronger, on the LSU side. And my first year medical school tuition, first year, not semester, was $800.
American dollars.
But it went up every year by $200.
Oh my goodness.
So the second year was 1,000, 1977 to 81.
Wow.
It was still a great deal. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
Then went up to 1,000 the next year. My junior year was 1,200. My senior year was all the way up to 1,400.
Oh
We
my
almost protested.
Jeez. Yeah.
Whereas the private university then was already around $15,000. So you're talking about 4 years of $60,000 in $1980. So
Yeah, it's a tenth of the price.
yeah,
Yeah.
Wow.
less.
Less.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, wow, that's incredible.
So I was very lucky. I was very fortunate. Yeah.
And even if you had gone the more expensive, like
Yeah.
what was the alternative in cost? How much more would it have cost to go to Tulane?
Tulane's tuition was about $15,000 a year,
Okay.
and the additional cost would be the same. The books, the lodging, all
Sure.
that stuff.
Yeah.
So it was 800 into 15,000. It goes what, about 18 times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were making an educated, informed decision.
Yeah, my father was going to help me with the tuition. He also made an educated
He made the decision easier.
Yeah.
We work with a lot of people in the medical field, and a lot of people come out with a very absorbent amount of debt.
Oh, yeah.
Looking at it now, obviously your situation back then is very different to the present day. Is
correct.
medicine a field that you would recommend people go into, or what's your take on it now?
Yeah, it somewhat saddens me to have this perspective on it, but it's become very frustrating, and it's become so burdened with dealing with insurance companies, hostile insurance companies,
Yeah.
with dealing with regulations, many of which don't make any sense, with dealing with corporate administrative imposition, that it's got all of this other baggage that really does dominate your day more than trying to take care of patients. But it can be very frustrating, and I think you're seeing a lot of burnout in physicians because they have to shoulder all this non-clinical burden, and it just, as you'd expect, it gets more so every year.
So it seems like it's not even just that it's cost prohibitive, but just experientially
It's experientially difficult. I mean,
Yeah.
what I advise young people that have asked me is basically, I think it's got to be a heart thing, not a head thing. It's got to be, this is the only thing I can see myself doing where I'm going to be happy with what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And if it's the only thing you see yourself doing, I wouldn't discourage somebody. But if it's one of several career choices, all that are looking reasonably attractive. And it's a question of which one. I would take a long look at this before going into it.
How familiar are you with the standards and regulations, et cetera, outside the U.S.? Do you feel like you would have different advice for a different country, or do you not know enough about it?
I don't know specifically a lot of the healthcare standards, but if you take, for example, the EU countries tend to have a more socialized system.
Mm-hmm.
That's also the EU, as I understand it, is a high regulatory environment. So I would guess, and it's totally a guess, I may be completely wrong, and I'm not claiming I know. I just want that disclaimer out there.
We are putting this on record.
My guess is that Europe would be a highly regulated environment. Now, that having been said, even though you'd have reimbursement regulations to fool with, you've got single payers, so you don't have multiple insurance companies. You've got single payers, so it's simpler in terms of numbers, but it's probably not simpler in terms of complexity. But that's a guess, and I don't want to speak more on it because I just don't know.
Yeah. I guess I wonder, what if it is a head versus heart decision, right? It feels like you want to make it easier for people to go into this field. We need more doctors and medical professionals. What would make it easier?
Yeah, I think people want to go into medicine because they want to do medicine. They don't want to spend time with insurance companies and regulations and all this extraneous stuff that's superimposed on it. I think you'll hear many doctors now think that corporate equity in medicine is to me not true to the spirit of what it should be. And it also makes things very complicated. And also it deprives clinicians of a significant degree of autonomy. So I think if you could restore some degree of autonomy and you could lighten the administrative burden, I think people would be more attracted to it. And somehow, if you could lighten the amount of debt that they finish medical training with,
if possible.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about this in a prior podcast, but an absorbent amount of our GDP goes to the healthcare system, and over 20% of it.
Now,
over 20% of the costs that do go to the healthcare systems are just for administration expenses and fees, which is unbelievable.
Yeah, and then I don't want to get too political, but if you look at private equity in healthcare and health insurance companies, most hospitals, as you well know, are running at 2 to 3% profit
margin. Yeah.
Most health insurance companies, the last time I looked a few years ago, they were making 12, 13%. I don't know. Maybe you know better.
That's correct.
And frankly, they don't add any value to the patient's experience or the patient's care. So that's a huge expense that has no value to the consumer, basically. And I'm not saying everything insurance companies do is bad or wrong or indifferent, but there's a lot of costs there that the patient doesn't ever really feel any benefit from.
Or the hospital,
unless they invested in these companies.
Correct. Yeah, unless they put it in their 401k.
That may be the defense.
Yeah, exactly.
Although, I mean, you're looking at UNH right now. United Healthcare is down 60% from I think its highs.
Well, as you know, there was an extraordinary event with their CEO 5 months ago. And the extraordinary event to me was not that there was some person with probably mental illness who was supposed to do that, but the reaction of the country was good riddance.
That was, and I wonder about how much of that is, on the margins that gets highlighted, like emphasized online, et cetera.
Of course.
And you also have, Elizabeth Warren was like, well, violence is never the answer, but you can only push people so far. It's almost like saying, well, this was a logical consequence.
And
people have breaking points.
I think she's saying, everybody's frustrated with this, and we need to do something about it.
Yes.
And we haven't done anything about it, and this is a consequence of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I know Kaylee, her biggest frustration on a day-to-day activity is just fighting with insurance companies all the time with patients. And that's kind of it. Was it always like this in medicine when you started? I mean, you've been in medicine a long time.
Worse.
Has it? Okay.
When did it shift?
Yeah.
Hard for me to say because except for having to justify a procedure or treatment by speaking to a physician colleague at the insurance company. We always had staff in my practice to deal with them. So I would only, when there was a denial of a treatment that I thought was an indicated justified treatment, I would be involved with the insurance company. And, those conversations could take anywhere from 5 to 40 minutes. And that's time away from taking care of patients. From a personal standpoint, it's also uncompensated time. The insurance company is not going to send me money for my 40 minutes of time talking on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an appointment or two with a patient that I couldn't have that day and somebody wanting to be seen. I would say that insurance denial stuff has gotten worse in the last 15, 20 years or so.
Yeah.
This concerns me personally at the moment because my mom was actually just diagnosed with a very serious condition. And there is one FDA approved medication for it, and it is $250,000 a year for that medication.
Yeah.
That is obviously, the hope is that we're going to be able to cut that significantly with the right insurance in place. But, she's, it's either Medicare or private insurance, et cetera, and she's got to evaluate her options. We're going to have to choose what kind of insurance she gets based on who will pay for this. But even, I think, best case scenario, we're going to be looking at like $1,000 a month out of pocket.
Yes.
And she's like, well, that's too much money. And there's no amount of money for me personally that I would be like, that's too much money for my mom. But like for her, like for people to be in a situation where they have to say, well, that's too much money, I guess I'm just going to die.
Yeah, they literally can't afford it in the wealthiest country in the world.
Yeah.
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 It's just kind of sad that, you would think that a good healthcare system would be a basic right for someone in this country.
Yeah, people argue it about being a right, and I agree with you conceptually. I think basic healthcare should be available to everybody, regardless of whether they can pay anything or they can pay thousands of dollars. I think everybody should have healthcare coverage. I think you know more than I do, the commonest cause of bankruptcy in the country is probably healthcare expenses.
Yes.
That's a situation that should not be.
Well, that's
That
because
just
student loans
shouldn't be.
can't cause bankruptcy.
Yeah.
We can't get out of those.
That's true.
No, but it just shouldn't. You shouldn't go bankrupt because you got sick.
Yeah.
So we talk about being a right. Unfortunately, it's not a right because it's a commodity.
It is.
Because,
Yeah.
But we have to prioritize it so that it is among the top commodities that we buy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the nation as a whole should make healthcare available to everybody so that their lives are not otherwise financially destroyed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got a big family now, kids, grandkids, all that. So would you advise them to kind of go into medicine unless they had their heart set on it? It doesn't sound like
no.
it
Again, I think
necessarily,
it's a heart decision here. I mean, the brain decision is a negative.
Yeah.
The heart decision is what's going to drive you, and they may get that disease like I had it, and want to do it, and I wouldn't discourage that. But if, like I said, if you're looking at it as one of multiple options, and it's really got to be what you want to do, and almost to the exclusion of something else to make it really feel worthwhile to you.
Do any of them have like biology sets set up in the rooms now doing experiments?
Or the grandkids now?
Yeah.
Well, one of them I was launching model rockets with last year, so there's some hope there.
Okay, got it. Yeah,
very good.
He when he was younger, when he was about 6 or 7, he asked me would I set up a lab in the garage with him in my house.
Yes, I will.
I never got around to it. But I may still have that opportunity. That would be fun.
Yeah. Well, that's what grandkids are, right? They're more opportunities to. So you had a really important relationship in terms of like a mentorship with your father, right?
Yeah.
How has that informed you as a dad? Like how has that, shaped you or guided you in how you want to advise your kids?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's helped me a great deal. I think, every message has a transmitter and a receiver.
Sure.
Well, a couple of my receivers are pretty good at picking up, and a couple of them don't want to tune into that station.
This is the selective hearing we were talking about earlier.
Oh, they just, they're not. I'm not interested. I don't understand it. I don't, and they just don't want to engage with it. and two of them are. And as you know, one of them is very much engaged with it, and probably student surpasses teacher at this point.
I would agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or at least in terms of level of interest, if not knowledge.
Fair. Yeah.
Probably both.
Yes.
So I've had a mixed reception. I was talking with that son of mine because his son is now will be 13 later this month.
Wow.
And my son asked me, would I get involved with helping to teach my grandson? And I said, sure, I'll be happy to teach him. I said, yeah, I think we should talk about this and this. And then my son says, no, I want you to talk about that.
I actually printed off a syllabus for you.
You just give this speech.
You're the instructor. That's
it. You're the teacher's assistant. TA at college.
I'll review the notes later.
So, and I think that particular grandchild appears to be interested. He has an interest in math, and it's interesting because there's a correlation in my family, and this is, an N of 4, right? The two that were very interested in math are interested in finance, and the two that were, liberal arts oriented. It's like what you'd expect. The philosopher and the poet don't care.
Yes. Well, that's how, I remember one story that you told me about one of your sons, which is one of my favorite stories, and I actually tell this one a lot. I'm happy to tell it, but you have
I think
you
some
want
of
me to
the
tell it?
smartest kids I know,
Yeah.
and I would love for you to tell
you
that
want me to
story.
tell the story about when he was having a temper?
Yeah.
So I have a son. He was about 8 at the time. He was young. I think he was 8, maybe 9, but I think he was younger than that. And he was having a temper tantrum about something, and I don't even remember what set him off, but he was raging. And at one point, this is back when we had landlines, he grabs a phone off the counter and picks it up and throws it across the room, and it breaks a picture that's on the wall. And I was trying to get some way to calm him down, and I said to him, son, blindly smash. I said, I can't think of a single instance in which blindly smashing property can lead to anything fruitful. And about 2 seconds, he looked at me and said, what about a piñata? Let's see, it makes all the criteria. Okay. And I walked away.
Win this
I walked away. Round to sun.
Touche.
It was so quick, and I said, geez, this kid's brain is rolling. And that's in the middle of a temper tantrum.
Can you imagine if he had even more time?
Quick
Well, it's
thinker.
the same kid. I go in his room. He's between 6th and 7th grade. He's 12 years old. He's in the summer, and I go in there, and he's reading. I said, what you reading? He said, Nietzsche. And I say, you reading that for school? He says, you don't read Nietzsche for school. You read it for fun. So I walked out of that room.
Do you?
Oh, my.
So now that your kids are older,
Yeah.
obviously they have kids of their own.
Yeah.
What kind of money lessons and what lessons are you trying to pass down to them at this stage?
I guess I think of it. There's kind of 3 or 4 areas. The first thing I would try to do with the 13-year-old is, I think, to talk about the whole concept of budgeting. And what budgeting is about and how it's helpful, and that'll appeal to his sense of math and numbers and balance, whatever. I think the second thing I want to focus on is debt, and I don't know what the pros do, but I look at debt in three buckets. You got good debt, bad debt, and risk debt. So good debt is when you can get a mortgage at 2% and inflation's 3.5%. So you're already making money on that. That's good debt.
The math is math.
Bad debt is, credit card debt, or buying a $100,000 car when you can't afford it and selling it 5 years later for $20,000.
Right.
And risk debt, which is if you're starting a business and you need money. So you don't know if it's going to be good or bad, but okay, it's a separate.
You're going to roll the
category.
dice.
Yeah.
Where do student loans fit into those debt categories?
It's an interesting question, and I think part of that is, do you value education beyond just what the earning potential is that you derive from it? And my own personal experience is yes, but I think that depends on the experience of the student, because I think there's a lot of students, a lot of whom I went through school with, they didn't they didn't really get out of it what they could have. They had a great time.
Yeah, sure.
So
Yeah.
I think it all depends upon the student and what they want to do or what alternatives they want to do. I mean, obviously you can self-educate yourself, but to me, there's value in it beyond just earning potential. But I think that's a risk benefit sort of analysis. Is this going to be enough to justify this expense?
Yeah.
Obviously, if it's career oriented, engineering, law, medicine, uh, IT, these kind of things where there's good
Some
return
sort of
on
dividend.
it, good return on it.
Maybe it's more of a risk debt then if you fall into those
Yes,
three buckets.
I think it's a risk debt. I think it's a risk debt.
Interesting.
I really like that breakdown of debt. I mean, we don't talk about that necessarily, the breakdown
How do you
debt.
classify it then? Or do you,
Well, I mean, we classify, I know like myself personally, I classify it based off of kind of rate of return and interest rates. So your
it's
perfect
good debt,
example
yeah.
of the mortgage is great debt right there because you're making money on it. And then certain things you're willing to roll the dice on.
Right.
I've never thought about it in those three
Oh, okay.
categories,
Yeah.
which I find mentally helps me categorize
Yeah, it
a
helps
lot.
me. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm thinking about taking out a loan. Which bucket does it fit in? And if it's not good debt's easy. You say, okay, sign me up. How much can I get?
Yeah.
If it's bad debt, I try to avoid it. Obviously, it's the risk debt that is really the decision making.
It is.
Yeah. Well, I think it's necessary versus unnecessary on one level, and then if it is unnecessary, then how much of it, like, what's the goal that's in alignment with that, right? Like,
and that kind of gets to the third of the three lessons that is, and you guys do this all the time, is when it comes to paying for something. What do I have to buy? What should I buy? What do I want to buy? And how you analyze those three things. Like, if I have to buy, I have to buy food, so I don't have any choice of that. Now you got a choice of what food to buy.
Yeah.
So within that, you got to break down, or what health insurance policy to buy, and then what should I buy? Okay, I don't need. I have a car and it's got a bad part, and right now it's fine, but I know it's gonna break, and so I'd like to fix it now because it's gonna be more expensive later. That's a should. I should buy that.
Should buy it.
But and then the want to buy that, obviously that's got to be okay. Everything else is taken care of.
Yeah.
But the other thing is to me there's a lesson in there is, okay. I don't think it's helpful to say to a young person, you have to save and invest everything, and you can't spend anything on fun now. Because that's one
It's
that's
not realistic.
right. But the question is, okay, how do you it's not realistic, and that's not what life's about.
Right.
Is that how do you proportion that? How do you? It's okay to buy this want to buy.
Yeah.
And how do you understand how to decide on the want to buys about buying something or not, and enjoying your life. As we know, you know we've got people in our families. I had somebody in my family had a very serious life-threatening disease at age 33.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to tell somebody who's looked in the face of death at a young age, don't spend money and enjoy yourself, because they've learned a lesson a lot of us don't learn until very late.
Right.
So how do you balance the want to haves with what else you're trying to do, and how do you make sure you enjoy yourself and do things you want to do without jeopardizing your future. So,
How do you communicate that balance?
well, it's interesting because, like I said, two of my kids, they got it. I don't have to do much more. The other two, they don't listen. So I'm going to see what the receptors versus the grandkid does. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll see what the grandkid does. But I think just if I can make them aware of it, just so that before they make a major purchase, they think about that. What category is this, and how does it create tension with the other ones? Even just to get them to stop and think critically about it. I think that's a plus. I think that's a win, because that means, if they're just going to buy everything on impulse, obviously that's trouble. But if they can think it through and make a reasonable decision, that's going to help them.
I think that Colin does this better than I do, actually. But when Colin makes a choice about, I want to buy something, there's something I would like to buy, he tends to put a plan into place and say, okay, how can I do this, right? I tend to do the other way.
Get out the credit card.
Yeah, no, I'm like, well, I'm going to do this. Yeah. And then after I do that, I'll figure out how to pay. But I think it's I always say it's better to prepare than to repair. And Colin's really good at preparing. But I think when you the best thing you can do is not enter that situation without knowing yourself, right? To put the time into understanding yourself. Charlie Munger has it. Do you know Charlie Munger?
Yeah.
Berkshire's
Warren Buffett's
partner.
Right.
Yeah. So he had a quote that I always thought was pretty good. He's like, you don't want to be a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest, right? You want to go in there knowing what to do and how to do it, et cetera. And I think spending time trying to understand yourself and your point of view on, is life short? Is it not? Do I have time? Do I not have time? Am I doing this for me? Am I doing this for somebody else? Like whatever that is. If you spend the more time you can spend talking these things through and thinking these through, I think that's what you had with your dad to a degree too. Like you want to have a trusted confidant.
You want to be able to critically think about that decision.
Yeah.
And you may say, you know what? I just really want this thing. I know it's wrong from critical thinking standpoint, but I'm going to buy it, but I'll make it up on something else. And there's sort of the third group and the other group I'm in, which was basically, I was in this group where we never spend any money. No, I'm not going to spend
deferred
money.
gratification.
Yeah, exactly. And that was like, my parents were depression babies. And that's the lessons I always got is deferred gratification. And, it's helpful in terms of saving. Yeah. But then it's not so helpful in terms of certain regrets that you develop. Sure. So it's all in the balance. I mean, and that's what it's about.
It is. Well, I mean, there's one thing to have deferred gratification as long as the gratification eventually comes.
Yeah,
sure. And you don't know how far you can actually
you don't know
defer
if you
it.
live long enough to get the gratification.
Exactly. So I think what you're teaching, to summarize, is really a good balance. Yeah. If I'm to summarize everything, it's a balance of the buckets. It's a balance of risk. It's a balance of budgeting. It's a balance of everything. Yeah.
Balance of fun, all of it. Right. Balance.
That's awesome. So now when you I'll say, you have the patriarch and matriarch of the family, and it's a big family now. Yes. When it comes to money management and managing everything for your kind of family.
No, they're on their own.
Yeah, they're on their own. I guess, do you talk to them about like investments and things like that and how to go about managing that as well, or?
Well, as you know, one of my children doesn't need my advice.
He's very into it.
It's always nice.
My second one is an ascetic. He doesn't ever want to buy anything.
Also very easy to manage.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
He's giving it away to charity.
Yeah.
And the other two I talk to, I talk to, especially they've had recent experiences buying houses. Mm-hmm. And so I talk to them a lot about, what kind of purchase that is, what kind of debt that brings, what it does in terms of equity, what it does in terms of tax, all this kind of stuff that they're aware of, so that they're aware of all the moving parts when they made a decision about what and how much to spend on the house. So I sort of, yes, I do. And I talk to them about debt. For example, there was one of my kids whose spouse had a lot of student debt.
Okay.
And they had cash lying around. And I said, pay the debt off. And they had a car loan and they had enough cash to get rid of it. So I was instructing them, okay, that's bad debt, know. And in this case, one was risk debt, but based on what they did, it ended up being a bad risk because they didn't really have the earning potential. So it's more now with them as being adults in your age group is kind of helping them when each circumstance arises rather than trying to give them an overview of how to manage it.
I feel like having somebody that you can call, right, just to talk things through.
Yeah,
is
really, and they do. They call.
Yeah,
they call.
That's
great. They call freely, and I'm happy to tell them what I know. And often the answer is, Well, talk to your financial advisor. But I tell them what I know.
Yeah. Here's what I think. Now,
Yeah.
also call your advisor.
Exactly.
Well, I think it's
That's
good,
what they get paid for,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Well, I think it's good to always have that kind of sounding board when you come in to make these decisions, because like you had it with your dad, I feel like in the beginning, with helping you make the decision to go into med school, they probably saw it from a very early stage on, versus, you can probably see with grandkids and kids, the directions that they're going. So if they're kind of leaning down one path, you can say maybe this isn't the right one for you.
Yeah, and it's hard because I don't think most people know before age 10 what they really want to do.
How could you?
Yeah, exactly. I have a I have a close a friend of mine who was the VP of Human Resources at the hospital where I
Okay.
worked, and I used to always, every time I'd see her, I'd tease her, and I would say, I've talked to lots of kids about what they want to be when they grow up. None of them ever said I want to be in HR. That's what I tell them every time.
What'd she say back?
She said, it's aspirational. She didn't say that. She didn't have an answer. It was just kind of a standing joke.
That's funny.
Yeah. Do you think about legacy at all?
Yeah, I think about legacy. I mean, I do. I think about legacy primarily in terms of being able to maybe help my kids and their children reach some of their goals.
Mhm.
And I think, and you and I have discussed this before, but I think there's a big advantage to having several generations in a family have the same financial advisor, because that person, I'm not privy to everything that's going on with my kids, and they're not privy to everything that my wife and I have gone on. But that person has the big picture. That person knows where, and what kind of resources are in different sections, and where there aren't resources. And if I'm fortunate enough that I have some resources that I can share with them, they can very much help. The advisor can very much help me help them, because the
Mhm.
advisor knows where they need help. And it's not only specifically like it might be college savings accounts,
Mhm.
um, or it might be any number of other things. But I think there's a real advantage, and I think to some extent, it may, based on your family structure, extend beyond the lineage of children and grandchildren. I think there are families where there are siblings of an investor who don't have heirs, or whose heirs are very wealthy, and sometimes those people own assets jointly.
Mhm.
I think that's also a big advantage, to have one advisor sort of, again, have the big picture and knows where to shift those resources. Because, if you're just managing the Army and you don't know what the Navy and the Air Force is doing, you're not going to be nearly as effective
Sure.
than if you've got an understanding of what everybody's doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big advantage. And I say that because what I feel now, but also because previously my prior financial advisor um, was not advising. Of course, my kids were younger; they really didn't have much in the way of financial considerations or assets. But but when they had their own advisors, they weren't using my advisor, and I just get a much better sense. But my advisor now, who also advises my children and grandchildren, say, look. So and so is having trouble funding, college education fund. How do you feel about helping that out? Or how do you feel about, this one's taking this risk? How do you feel about, backing that? Whatever it is.
Mhm.
I just think, and like I said, we've talked about, I just think that's
yeah.
a real advantage. And that's something I would recommend people consider. Yeah.
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 I think it's important to have, I mean, and you talk about this with your kids as well, setting the goals and setting the plan.
Yeah.
And it's nice when the goals and the plans align together as a family.
Correct.
Especially as you get older, your goals, when aspirations change to focus more on your kids and your
Correct.
grandkids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you have any intention of trying to develop and manage some generational wealth, it's key. It's really key. Um, I don't find myself quite in that position, but I'm sure there are plenty of people that can really start to plan for generational wealth, and I think that's a big advantage to have one person or one group doing that. I really do.
Can I challenge that though? I feel like one thing I think there's a misconception of what generational wealth is, right? I think the majority, a large swath of this country, there's going to be,
Yes.
the passing on of
Transfer,
wealth,
yeah.
right? The transfer of wealth from we're getting to the point where the baby boomer generation is going to be transferring wealth. I think that any amount of wealth that you transfer on can have an impact, right? So you want to have intentions behind that. You don't need to have $80 million, $100 million to make multi-generational
No, I
impact.
don't disagree with that at all. It's just it just doesn't feel that way.
I know.
In this day and age, when you look at home and car prices, I can
Right.
appreciate
I mean,
it.
it's like say, okay, generational wealth is kind of the 1970s definition where, okay, so the next 5 generations will never have to work.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
I had a meeting with some clients last week. They have a multi-million-dollar estate, right? And they've got enough money. They're in their late 70s, right? So they've got enough money that they're going to be okay. And yet the client is worried. One of the clients is worried that she remembers when she was a kid and they couldn't afford a loaf of bread. And so she's worried about being able to afford a loaf of bread.
This is my wife and our circumstances. My wife grew up in a very poor household. They, the last 5 days of the month, they usually ate bread and sugar sandwiches with butter, and that was it. But, and she is always worried. It's interesting. The last year or so, she's changed, but she was always worried we're not going to have enough. And I think that becomes an anxiety that you develop that pretty much no amount of wealth is going to free you from.
Right? That's 100%.
100%. Well, those
You could
habits
say,
are ingrained.
if I had a couple $1 billion, I probably wouldn't worry about it, But,
Yeah. Well, something that when it comes to wealth and family planning too is, when we talk about the money, and I agree with you, Wheeler, that, any bit of money can really help the next generation. Yeah. But with that being said, money can also destroy the next generation as well. And if you haven't done the proper planning and education with kids and whatnot, that can be a real risk. And I think having a planner, some sort of team that can help with the finances to say, you might want to spend some more time, education on budgeting and things like that, or, debt management.
Or if need be, you even have a meeting with everybody. You get
Absolutely.
all the kids and the parents,
always a good
and you say,
idea.
okay,
100%.
here's what the pieces of the plan are. Here's your realistic expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good to avoid surprises.
Yeah.
That wraps up episode 16 of Compound Growth. A big thank you to our guest, Malcolm Rosenson, for sharing such an honest and thoughtful look into his life, career, and the special culture of New Orleans. From reflecting on Hurricane Katrina to navigating career decisions to raising 4 kids with 4 very different views of money, it was an inspiring conversation about resilience, perspective, and growth. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and share Compound Growth so more people can join us for stories like Malcolm's. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with a friend.
Compound Growth with Wheeler and Colin, sponsored by Ko-Fi Advisors. Reach out today. Yay!